What's up, losers? Oh, that's kind of mean. I don't have an opening for this one. All right, whatever. Let's just get into it. So the Marvel Disney Plus shows are pretty good. Not a lot of bad things to say about them, despite what Twitter has to say. But I think I'm pretty much alone here in thinking Loki wasn't really a show I was particularly excited for, and part of that is because Loki isn't really my favorite character in the MCU. It's not really that he's like a bad character. I like him. And Tom Hiddleston's performance is probably one of the best performances in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe. But yeah, Loki isn't really my favorite of the bunch. I don't even think he really cracks the top 10, or if he does, he's number 10. Maybe. I don't really keep track of numbers. Yeah, I'm probably committing sacrilege right now because Loki's probably one of the most popular characters in the MCU, but yeah, he just doesn't really do much for me. I actually like the idea of loose cannon anti-hero type characters because they're a bit morally dubious and really only seek to benefit their own ends. They have their own agendas, and sometimes in order to fulfill those agendas, they're more willing to compromise their morality. They're willing to do things like murder or thievery or littering, all in an effort to get what they want. And the MCU sure wants us to think that Loki's a loose cannon. Historically, in Marvel Comics, that basically was the role that Loki plays. He's the anti-hero loose cannon who isn't really inconsistent because he doesn't have a single characterization. He's inconsistent because he always has his own agendas, and sometimes those agendas clash with the heroes, other times those agendas help the heroes. But that's not really how the MCU portrays Loki. They prop him up like he's a anti-hero, but he's more like a redeemable villain than he is an anti-hero. I feel like in fiction and literature, we conflate the two, anti-hero and redeemable hero, as the same character. And they can be. But the core difference between them is that one has an arc and the other has a personality. I realize I pretty much just said that redeemable villains don't have personalities. That's not what I said. Zuko from Avatar definitely has a personality. What I mean is that anti-heroes don't really have arcs. They don't really change. Not really. Or if they do have an arc, it's more goal orientated than character motivated. They're not really seeking to change themselves, and the author isn't really pretending to want to change them. In contrast, the redeemable villain does have an arc. The end game is them changing and becoming a better person. Think Zuko from Avatar The Last Airbender and every bad guy from Steven Universe. And yeah, that's kind of my thing with Loki. I like the idea of Loki, but I can never really get past the fact that he's more written as a redeemable villain. He also basically popularized that early 2010s Tumblr tragic backstory, sad senpai villain. His dad lied to him about being adopted, and he neglected him. This, at the heart of it, is really kind of my problem with Loki. He grew up and was raised in complete wealth and luxury, raised by two parents who we're told were neglectful, but when we actually see what they do and watch the movies ourselves, kind of seem like they were good parents to him. His mom taught him magic, and she apparently taught him really good magic. Odin even compliments him. And speaking of Odin, I guess one could probably make the argument that since Thor was the oldest son, he basically doted more on Thor because Thor was the one who was expected to ascend to the throne, and Loki felt like a little resentment that Thor got all of that kind of attention. Oh, poor baby, did your daddy leave all the money in the estate to your older brother? Tragic. Like, I get that resentment can be a strong motivator for someone as kind of broken as Loki is, but I feel like trying to murder your brother and your father and leveling half a planet using a magic stone scepter that a space mafia lord gave you isn't really a proportionate response. Which brings me to my next point. Loki in the MCU isn't really mischievous. They keep telling us that he's a mischievous scamp. They don't really show him being mischievous. We see him do that in Ragnarok, but it's pretty much the only movie where he does anything mischievous, scampy. In Thor 1, he's a villain. He's just a straight up villain. He's not doing anything mischievous. He's just being evil. In the Avengers, he's not really being mischievous. He's being a psychopath. He keeps saying over and over again that he wants to rule Midgard and be a king and lord all over others. I think Iron Man put it quite plainly that what he really wants is attention. And that's not really something I would expect from a god of mischief. It's more like something I would expect from a little kid who feels so much resentment that he's going well out of his way to compensate for that by killing people. Which brings us to Thor 2, where, again, he's not being mischievous. He's an edgy, hot topic kid who's, like, sad. There's that little bit at the end of the movie where we find out that Loki was pretending to be Odin. And yeah, I guess that's a little mischievous. It's a little duplicitous and actually pretty cunning. And then just kind of staying there as king. He doesn't like do anything evil. He just vibes. And then, he inadvertently is the reason Odin dies. And it actually doesn't really feel like malicious. Like, it was kind of an accident. Whatever, it's Taika Waititi. He could film a pig in a field, and I would call it a masterpiece. But in comes the issue here. Because Loki is supposed to be a redeemable villain and have an arc about changing and about growing, he can't really be mischievous because mischief isn't innately evil. We get barely a glimpse of that kind of Loki. And then for the rest of the time, we just learn secondhand about other times that he does stuff like this. Ragnarok does that a lot, actually. Tell us about mischievous, pranky things that Loki does. Loki has to be a character that you root for to be a better person. And, well, you can't really do that if you go with a version of Loki who's always pranking people, always being cruel, but like childlike cruel, not Kylo Ren, I'll use the Force to get what I want from you cruel. But like, they also want to make their cake and eat it too by telling us that he's the god of mischief and he pulls pranks all the time. He's a loose cannon. You never know what he's gonna do. Well, actually, I know exactly what he's gonna do because you told us right from the very beginning that he's evil, and that he's evil because he has a lot of resentment for his family, And a character like that is just going to predictably become a good person, and even a hero in some cases. Well, you just make a show about him where he runs into like a billion other versions of himself. The Loki series is very weird for me. Like, not weird because it's about different variations of Loki. Like, I was on Tumblr during the early 2010s. I survived the one cest apocalypse. It's weird because now more than ever, I have no idea what they're trying to do with Loki. The series kind of frames itself as a story about a rebel hero rising from the ashes to topple down an oppressive regime, like it's a YA novel. And if anything, the whole God of Mischief angle gets critiqued a lot. You were probably thinking while I was doing all this like dress down of Loki that I clearly hadn't watched the Loki series. Well, I have. I just wanted to say some stuff because if anything, the Loki series is more like a examination of the way that Marvel has characterized Loki in these movies for the past decade. Can't help but say that contextually this is Marvel basically trying to fix their mistake here with Loki. They even went through the trouble of killing Loki in Infinity War, bringing him back in Endgame, and creating a whole streaming show just to kind of like hit reboot on the character. I do think it's kind of interesting that of all the versions of Loki that they could have picked throughout the MCU, they picked the version of Loki that just got done getting his ass handed to him in Avengers and just before Thor 2 so that they can iron out edgy Loki before they drop him back into 2013 into the worst Marvel movie. And it really is the worst. So yeah, I mostly made this video to capitalize on the Loki series ending on Wednesday this week. And I also want to talk about my theory about who I think is the person who's ruling the TVA. But before we go forward, I've been kind of a downer about Loki as a person in this video, so I want to first talk about some things that I like about Loki. I already said that I like Tom Hiddleston's performance of Loki, and yeah, it's a great performance. He's fun, he really gets into character, and you can tell he really likes to play Loki. I like his little vague conjuring ability where he can like summon a knife in his hand or something like that, and he can also summon duplicate versions of himself, like hollow clones. They kind of explain it further in the Loki series. At first, I thought the horn crown thing was a little ostentatious and kind of dumb, but it's grown on me over the years. I kind of like it now. I also like a bad guy or gray area type character who just does what they want and revels in what they're doing, and that's kind of Loki and Thor Ragnarok. Despite the fact that I think Thor 2 is the worst Marvel movie, I actually really like Loki's look in Thor 2. It's his best look in my opinion. Just look at that hair. That fantastic long hair. I love that in the Loki series they retained the myth from Norse mythology where Loki cuts off some of Lady Sif's hair. I love it because it's so random, but it's also kind of cool that they actually did some reading of Norse mythology and decided to put it in there. Alright, and now I'm going to talk about some things I like about the show itself before I actually start talking in length about the show. The TVA. I think the TVA is really cool. It's got this Men in Black X-Files vibes that I'm really into and I think is really cool. I love that they use like analog looking tech, like old screens, old computers. I love the retro vibe they're going with. I also like the idea of hunting down variants who have split the timeline off down into different paths where time isn't supposed to go. I think I'm the only person I know who didn't really question why the TVA does what it does. Like, I don't even think they needed to introduce the whole time war thing that is the backstory for why the TVA exists. I think the idea of trying to preserve one single timeline, I don't know, in my opinion, is pretty self-explanatory to me. It didn't really need to be explained or anything. I kind of just assume that whatever reason there is for there to be a one single timeline, then there must be a larger purpose in life itself, and I fulfill a role in that timeline. I guess that makes me a sheep. Bah. The theme song. Yeah, I really liked the theme song. It just goes back to the Men in Black X-Files vibes. They're going for weird, kooky, spacey. Ooh. I also like that opening title sequence where like the logo changes fonts in between each letter. Miss Minutes. I love her. She's adorable. Miss Minutes could vibe check me and I'd be like, you're doing amazing, sweetie. She's also voiced by Tara Strong, who is famous in the realm of voice acting, especially for cartoons. And she's cool. She's a pretty awesome person. Alligator Loki. Sorry, I was really getting into it. Alligator Loki is the best thing to ever come out of the Marvel shows. In fact, I'd say he's the best thing to ever come out of Disney Plus. That's right. Count your days, Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda wishes he had what Alligator Loki has. So obviously we're going to find out who's controlling the TVA and who created the Timekeepers. And in my opinion, there are two options, and I'm pretty sure you can guess which one. Kang the Conqueror. So for those of you who don't know who Kang the Conqueror is, or knows nothing about comic books, anything, Kang the Conqueror is think Alexander the Great, but his empire is time. He's basically the epitome of nonsense comic book storylines. He's a time traveler guy. He goes through all different timelines and multiverses all throughout time. He's got 10 bajillion alternate versions of him throughout the multiverse, and he even creates a super duper council of different versions of him. It's so stupid. It's so dumb. But I want it because it just sounds too stupid of a plotline to not get ridiculously torn to shreds in an MCU movie. In the comics, his ultimate goal is to collect a bunch of people in a bunch of places and things all throughout time and put them all into one city where he rules as king or emperor or whatever. Pros to this are pretty self-explanatory. It basically sets up the end game for this saga. It's going to be a multiverse time war deal, and Kang the Conqueror is the Thanos of this endgame. For me, though, there is a big con to this. Narratively speaking, the show hasn't really been building up to Kang. A lot of evidence I've seen coming up from big YouTube channels that make it their business to dissect every Easter egg and clue they find. They all seem to come up with the same circumstantial evidence. Stuff that doesn't lead to the conclusion that it's Kang. Just stuff that if you maybe have a passing knowledge of comic books and a passing knowledge of behind the scenes production stuff going on with Marvel. I saw a bunch of YouTubers citing the face of the guy in the courtroom behind Ravonna looks kind of like the actor who is playing Kang in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Dude, that's just a face. There's a tower in the void limbo world area in the last episode that has the sign Kang, but like it's with a Q and not a K. And there just happened to be a guy in the comic books who's called Kang and with a Q, and he like works with Tony Stark, and it turns out he was Kang the Conqueror the whole time. Kang with a K. The strongest evidence that I've seen that comes from the comics and actually has some pretty solid support in the like story wise comes from the fact that in the comics, Immortus, who's a version of Kang, because of course he does work for the TVA and for the guy who actually does run the TVA, which is, I forget his name, some guy at the Edge of Time. Immortus works with him, which means Kang does have a connection to the TVA and the Timekeepers. So yeah, that could easily be it. But these are all circumstantial evidence. There isn't any actual setup in the show that is directly leading up to a Kang the Conqueror reveal. Which brings me to option 2, which is really what my theory is. I think the guy who's behind the TVA is Loki. Specifically, I think that during the Time War or something, maybe the Time War is just a fake reason, it's not a real reason. At some point, Loki found a way to manipulate time and set about to conquer time himself by creating a sacred timeline, by creating one linear timeline and using magic or technology or something to basically destroy other timelines, other variations of his own timeline or something like that, as a way to both hide himself from other heroes who might be going through time travel shenanigans and discover that Loki's still alive or whatever, and also to kill other variations of himself so that he can be the only true Loki. I also think he uses this magic or technology in order to manipulate his timeline so that Thanos ultimately ends up killing him in order to further throw people off the scent. A good pro for this, in my opinion, is that it ties more cleanly into the themes of the show. We have the show's title card, which flashes between different fonts and letters for Loki in order to impart on us the idea that this is going to be about different versions of Loki. And it shoots back around to the beginning of this video where it's a show about critiquing Loki as both a villain and as a god of mischief. It's a show about Loki growing, maturing, and becoming a better version of himself by defeating another version of himself, a more evil version, and finally becoming the hero that he's destined to become. Yeah, crazy. I'm theorizing that the show is gonna make Loki a better character, even though I really don't like that trope for Loki. Plot twist. Not even Loki would see this coming. And then having to defeat another Loki who's the ultimate final showdown boss? Crazy. I think the big con here is that this doesn't really add anything to the larger MCU. It doesn't really provide anything big to the MCU. It's just say much except LOL, it was Loki all along. It's just kind of like this dumb little crazy thing in this dumb little crazy show, and it would be funny and awesome, but like, you know, it doesn't really say much other than that. It would also make the Twitter fans riot because it's not Kang the Conqueror, and Twitter Marvel fans are annoying. So yeah, those are just some of my little thoughts about Loki, the character, and about the show. I wanted to get this video out because I really have nothing else going on my channel right now, and I had a couple thoughts about Loki, about the character Loki and the show Loki. And you know, the next episode's about to drop. Figured I might get it in as quickly as I can. So if you like this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and comment down below what your crazy stupid theory about Loki is, or like flame me for not liking Loki, even though that's not what I said. Also follow me on Twitch if you want to see me crash and burn while playing video games in real time. I don't have an outro, so I'm just... I'm not gonna get used to doing this with my hair. And speaking of Loden, whoa, look at that. Look at Loki. How did he do that? Then there's this whole story. Ooh. I was gonna drink water, but forgot to fill it up. It just goes back all the way to that whole Men in Black X-Men. The strongest